Hello, and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I'm Todd Foley, CDO and CISO with Lidonia.ai. I'm joined today by Ellen Webb, Vice President of Shopper Analytics and Insights at PepsiCo. Ellen, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, happy to be here.
It's always interesting as we talk to different practitioners in our industry to understand what led them to their particular role. I was talking to someone the other day who started as an actual scientist before they got into
Oh,
data
wow.
science, from Petri dish to to pie charts, I guess. And I'm really curious. Tell me about your current role as Vice President of Shopper Analytics and Insights at PepsiCo, and maybe some key milestones that led you to that position.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do it. So the team that I lead today, we lead development and deployment of commercial insights, capabilities, and digital products. So what exactly does that mean? And, translated into non-industry speak, it's really about how we're accelerating growth for our, PepsiCo and through our retailer partners through analytics and insights. We have a relatively small team and we work to really, do as much as we can to help to scale them throughout the organization. So we're making, analytics accessible is probably another way to talk about it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, really making sure that we're bringing the shopper through. The shopper lens is very clear. And something that I was actually just talking with my team about earlier today is just really driving actionable impact. Because I think as we think about analytics and insights, sometimes that can seem a little bit wonky and, nerdy, which is great. We're allowed to be nerds and encouraged to be that, but we really needs to be in service of that actionable impact across certainly our PepsiCo portfolio.
Well, it sounds like you're very, very close to the business, right? That your
Yes.
mandate is to have influence on PepsiCo customers and to help drive that business in an immediate way. So it's not sort of back office data. It's something
No. Yeah.
forward facing, very immediate, which I think is not always common in different roles in our industry. What led you to a position where you were taking the arcane data, not that it's that arcane, but and applying it in such an immediate way?
Yeah. So I would say throughout my career, I always describe it as I've been drawn to roles that really balance left brain and right brain work. So what does that mean? I really love to get into and to just completely nerd out with the data and analytics. It's something that has always been a passion point for me. I'm a very curious person, but also really, love the right brain part of it, of bringing it to life together with human insights, with strategy to get somebody, whether it's an internal customer or an external customer, to take action and do something with that. So, from a functional perspective, that's meant, customer facing roles like category management, which is really where I call it, that's where I grew up. It's where I spent much of my early career. And then have also had some more internal roles like sales strategy, business planning, and then most recently, getting into insights and analytics. And then from a channel perspective, have been able to work across both retail and away from home. So I've had just a ton of learning there. So if you think about the difference of buying things in a store versus, being out at an airport or at a hotel or in a, business cafeteria. So if you think about the differences of, how shoppers engage at that point, it's very different. And then most recently just added digital commerce and space transformation. So really truly rounding things out from a, omni-channel end-to-end experience. And really, each of the roles that I've had have given me different experiences and learnings that have prepared me for this role. But to your point on having an insights and analytics team that it is closer, not a back office. We're definitely not a back office. We're part of our commercial organization. And it's really been, I think, helpful for our team to become better insights and analytics professionals because they're in the room hearing the problems to solve, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But really, seeking to, hear what are the big challenges and how can we use the data and an analytics to do that? And in some cases, it's the least, I'll call it the least sexy of the things, where it's just like we hear people, are still doing things in Excel and it's highly manual, and our team can come in and say, hey, we can take and, make things more efficient so that you can get to that speed to action a lot more quickly.
That's brilliant. I mean, that breadth of experiences really makes your value proposition unique, right? And you're able to lead your teams in a way that's informed by your experience with the business and how you engage with the business. And I
Yeah.
think, you're talking also about a breadth of applying the analytics. You mentioned space transformation,
Yeah.
which I'm assuming has nothing to do with NASA, right?
Unfortunately, no, it does not.
But so you're working not only on sort of what to sell, how to sell it, but how to present it even in a retail location. Is that accurate?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's really about how do you take the strategy and the insight all the way down to in-store execution and making sure that, at the end of the day, when the shopper is standing at the shelf whether it's in the store or online,
Yeah.
that they have the options that they're looking for and making sure that and there's so much, science and data and analytics that goes into that most people probably don't realize, but it's, a lot of the reason behind what we do is to make sure that we're, meeting the shopper where they are and providing the things that they're looking for. And certainly helping our retailer partners are critical in that because at the end of the day, they're the ones that, own that kind of last moment of choice.
I think it's fascinating too, because you're talking about applying sophisticated analytics and machine learning to things like physical placement of product.
Yep.
At the same time, there's been an evolution across all industries, and from a traditional sort of brick and mortar model to all kinds of digital engagement and online transactions. How
Mhm.
do you merge those two things together in an impactful way?
Yeah, I would say it's, obviously it starts with the data. And the data, as you know, being in this industry, data is incredibly valuable. And I think it's something that, as we talk about data, for our first, the first thing that we always make sure that we're do is that we're, working in conduct with our data privacy, responsible use of information, because it's a privilege. It's not a right to have all this data. It's a privilege to have it. And we take, the utmost responsibility to make sure that we're using it in the right ways. Now that said, I think as you think about the data sources, we've got everything from open source data, we've got first, second, third party data, we've got proprietary household data, on top of a ton of data that we have that gets created through our DSD or direct store delivery network. And if you think about all those disparate data sources, the work that has to go into actually connecting them and making them into something that is actually valuable, is incredibly labor intensive. And that's where machine learning comes in. And just, I think it's the least I think it's the least kind of interesting part of, as we talk about, people talk about AI and machine learning and all that kind of stuff. But as you know, the data has to be in a place and in a way that is connected to do something with it. And so that's a place where we've really prioritized that work so that our teams are not spending their time and energy around, data engineering. And we've got a team that helps us to do that because it is critically important. But my team then is really focused on, what are we actually going to do with that data. So we're, I started off the answer to my question listing off, a litany of different data sets that we have, but we're very mindful in determining what are the data sets that we need to be able to answer the questions that we have. And if, there's been data sets that we've said no to, and it's not because they're not accurate or not interesting. It's just, they're not relevant to our business. So we're really mindful in making sure that we're, really not muddying the waters to the point that it will prevent us from, being actionable with the insights. Cause I think that's you know, one of the challenge for people who are in this business. And, a lot of us are just very curious and would love to just start to go down wormholes and, find out just for the sake of it versus being really purposeful about, what am I trying to answer and how do I do that in the best way?
Well, you talked a lot about how many different data sources you have, right? And how you're leveraging things like machine learning to try and reduce the burden that any lean team has in just
Yeah.
managing, cleaning, preparing, blending, all the traditional fun.
Yeah.
But you're also really talking about doing it in a guided way, right? It sounds like you're applying the business insight to the process of sorting through, weighting that data in a
Yep.
way that is very much integrated with what the desired business outcome is and what types of insights you're pursuing. And
Mhm.
I think that combination, tying things in terms of what you're trying to do so directly with how you're managing that data. First, it's a tremendous amount of work, and it requires a strong skill sets, both technically and from a business perspective. How
Mhm.
do you work with your team to build those teams, to maintain those teams, and how do you have them balance sort of the technical aspects of it, whether it's machine learning or just data prep, with
Mhm.
what you're trying to do at any given point in time?
So really what we do, which you mentioned process, and that's really about, that's I think central to how we really, effectively pull out these actionable insights. And it really starts with the problem to solve. And as we think about the problem to solve, that's really rooted in our PetViz approach, which is really about, how do we, partner with our retail partners in a way that is really insights fueled and performance driven. And when I use the word partnership, that's really, really important because it is a collaborative approach. So if you think about our retail partners, so I just talked through all the data that we have. Our retailers know their shoppers better than we ever will before, ever will. That is their sole purpose and who they're really serving. But what we can do is help to bring an outside perspective. So if you think about a shopper in any given retailer, that retailer is going to know what they do within their four walls, whether physical or virtual. We can then take that and say, okay, here's how your shopper is behaving when they're not inside of your stores, and really bring light to that. And so, as we're having having these conversations, this processor approach is really, really about getting clarity on what is the problem that we're trying to solve. It helps us to really be purposeful as we're going through the data. It helps us to be purposeful in the solutions that we're creating to really, how do we get at granular growth for our customers together with them? And so, as you talked about, where we sit in the organization, I would say that's something that is definitely unique in terms of where my team sits, because we are having those conversations, directly with the customer, sitting and having and listening for the things that sometimes there's not a question that's, explicitly, articulated, but it's something that we say, okay, I heard you say this. Can we understand a little bit more about that? So there's a lot of discovery that happens on the front end before we do any work. And sometimes the answer might not be in analytics. Sometimes the answer might be in some primary research that we have, or it could be third party information that we have to help to answer that. So we're really looking at, again, what's the problem to solve that we have, and then what is the right tool that we have in our toolkit to be able to answer that in an effective manner. And so I think it's just really that partnership approach. And in many cases, it's an iterative process, because we'll hear one thing and start to dig into it and say, okay, we found this. Does this feel like it's the right thing or not? And so just that partnership has been, critically important in terms of how we operate with our customer partners.
You're talking to my mind from the perspective of having a very mature data and data governance environment, that to be able to do that in an agile way, you must have a pretty comprehensive data catalog, data inventory to be able to identify when you do or don't have something useful, or whether you're going to use these third-party sources. And then to have the business requirement or the problem you're trying to solve drive your work around how you assemble that data and those data sets and how you go after trying to get to those answers. That's I think a place a lot of I know customers I work with would be jealous of.
Mm-hmm.
How do you look at your own environment from that sort of maturity scale? Are you, as I think you are, at that high level, or is it always possible to do more?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always possible to do more. I would say, we've got great partners in our strategy and transformation team that help us do a lot of that governance. So that's thankfully one thing that, it's not necessarily on my plate to manage, but we certainly, get to benefit, supremely from that. But what the work that we do is really a lot about, as you think about, there's the data, but then there's the solution that's driving. So I talked earlier about, being able to scale some of these solutions out to our organization. And so that's a lot of what we're working through too, is really organizing the analytics solutions that we have around some of these core problems to solve. So, are you seeking to, drive more trips? Are you seeking to build baskets? Like, what are those kind of high level business questions that here are the first, 2 or 3 solutions that you might want to go to start from? Which then I think it starts the conversation for those who might not be as familiar with it. But a lot of that, we go through, again, it's an iterative process to say, okay, I think we might be able to look at it this way, but maybe this will work. And so you kind of have to be willing to be agile with it and say, okay, based on, the problem to solve and the set of conditions that surround that, can start to help you narrow down and what the best way to approach it might be.
I think you have some unique challenges, right? And you alluded to them earlier when you were talking about helping retailers understand their customers beyond the experience within their four walls, right?
Yep.
You have these data sources coming related to physical activity and purchase history, plus the whole online and digital aspect of things. I think you referred to it earlier as the Phygital experience. Is that
Yeah,
right?
that is
What
right.
what does Phygital mean?
Yeah, so Phygital is really about the idea of blending physical and digital spaces. And if you think about that, this is not something that's entirely brand new. It's not, mind shattering idea, but it's also not anything that's super far off, right? It's really happening now. And it's really, if you think about, so that's, I would say the core of the definition of the word phygital. But if you think about what that means for us as an industry, it's really about, thinking about that phygital experience. When you're considering the strategic use of both the digital systems and the data to improve not only the online or the digital commerce experience, but also the in-store experience or the pickup experience. So every single shopping touch point that a shopper has across both online and in-store, and making that as seamless and it's just a natural experience for them. So what you see on shelf and store start to come together. And really, reducing friction and frustration for shoppers, because I think we've all had those experiences where the experience is not the same, and you want to be able to make sure that, hey, what I'm seeing online is what I'm not experiencing in store, and you want to make sure that those are synonymous and working together to raise the whole entire experience.
There's just so much data. I mean, it's almost data exhaust, right? Everything you do when you are shopping or you acquire a product, whether it's in a store or online, being able to mine that effectively with what is absolutely a huge volume of telemetry, I imagine,
Yeah.
it has got to be as much art as science. How do you chart ask your teams to pursue that? How do you give them direction around those things? Or is it always the ideal of let's make the customer's experience a positive one. Let's use that to drive the behavior we're looking for.
Yeah, I think that the shopper's positive experience is always like my team's remit is to look out for the shopper. And so that is the core of what it is that we do. And if you think about, talking about these phygital shoppers, they're the majority. So you've got 63% of shoppers are grocery shopping both online and in store, which is about 2.5% or 2.5 times growth since 2020. So this is a nearly ubiquitous behavior and will continue to grow. So it's something that I think at this point is not optional. At the end of the day, if people have a good experience, they're going to reward you with their loyalty. And so it's really, making sure that just again, that experience of online and in-store is seamlessly blended. And part of that does come down to data streams. So what do we know about the online experience compared to what's happening in terms of how people shop in both those environments? Because they're not necessarily the same, but they're unique, or I would say there are connective tissues between that. To make sure again that we're making logical leaps within that space.
But I think you're in a unique position because of the data you look at and the reason you're looking through it to kind of be able to talk about sociological trends, right? I think the markets have changed so much, impacted certainly by COVID and everything after that, as we've seen different shifts in where people live, how
Yep.
often they go to the office, all of those things, which must make an impact on their shopping behavior as well. You're in a unique position, and you're for your teams to document that and project what it's going to be. I would think.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, we
how
are. We
do
do
you-
a lot of that. And I think that's another, as you think about, the stat that I gave you that 63% of shoppers are doing both. And I think there are some things that oftentimes, in the insights world, you have to break out of what we call the sample size of one. It's what my experience is and what your assumptions are. And you kind of have to check that at the door and say, okay, what is the data telling us? And, Gen Z is a really interesting one in the physical space because they really like obviously the online experience, but they value going in store to, find new things. And so there's a lot of, I would say, interesting tension points that I think bust some of the myths in terms of how we think about, different demographic groups for sure.
with so many changes, with customer behavior being at least looking over the last couple of years is relatively volatile.
Mhm.
How do you approach answering questions for what's going to happen in the future if you can't base it on historical activity? How are you dealing with answering the questions that don't have hard data to do reporting on?
That is $1 million question. Usually my snarky answer is I don't have a crystal ball. Because you'd be amazed though how many times, and I think, I was, in this space during COVID and that the number of questions are like, what's going to happen? What can you tell us what's going on?
Right.
And so I think that, for us, it's really about how do you, I think a measured approach and saying there's a range of possibilities. And then there's also within some of these things, there's going to always be, faster movers and slower movers and people who kind of wait to see. And so I think being broad with what we think might happen, and really, I think, thinking through the implications of each of those things through our business is really important. So I think it's, you get into dangerous space when you when you confidently say, I think this is going to happen, because the likelihood of you being, accurate in that is pretty low. But saying, okay, here's a range of possibilities, and then, more importantly, thinking through what are the next potential implications for that if each of these things happen. Because I think, I'm sure this is the case in every business, but it's hard to think past, what's happening right now immediately in front of you. And it's really important to kind of take that pause and say what might happen. So I think that's one of the things that, as I'm in this role, is the thing that it's probably one of the most challenging things, but it's also one of the things that I love. When you don't have imperfect information, you kind of have to make a leap and say, okay, based on the data that we have or the things that we think potentially happen, here's what that looks like.
I think you always also have that North Star of knowing that if you can improve the consumer experience, you're going to be able to do good things, whatever the trends might be, right? So you don't have to have a crystal ball
Yes.
necessarily.
Yes. Although
But
it would be nice on occasion.
I
to
think
have
we
that.
would all like that. That's I'm waiting for the machine learning model that'll tell me everything that'll happen in the
Oh,
future,
there you
right?
go.
So, and Ellen, thank you so much for joining me today. For those of you listening, please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews. But Ellen, it's truly been a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.